I welcome everyone to our panel discussion on defining agnosticism. I'm joined by Matthew Watson and Xander Kaig. Hopefully, we'll also be joined by Rob, but we didn't want to keep people waiting. This has been a conversation that has been highly anticipated, and we're happy that we get to be here. Do we want to do quick introductions? Xander, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Xander Kaig. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I live in Orlando, Florida, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion. Thanks for inviting me to participate.
Thank you. Matthew, do you want to go next?
You bet. I'm Matthew Watson. I'm the president and CEO of Pro Social Workers, an organization that promotes viewpoint, political, and religious diversity within social work practice. And I live in Layton, Utah. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've lived and practiced I've practiced in 5 different states where I've been licensed, and just glad to be here and be a part of this discussion.
Awesome. We're happy to have you. And for those of you who don't know, my name is Nafis. I'm a professor of social work and also an author. So we'll get right into it and have this discussion. For those of you who are listening, please feel free to comment on X or on YouTube, and we'll be able to incorporate your comments into our conversation here. I'll keep mentioning that over and over again, just so people can interact with us. We do like an interactive conversation. So once again, if you are watching or listening on X or YouTube, please feel free to leave a comment, and we'll be able to see those comments come in and be part of our conversation. And so we'll get started with the first question here. If questioning faith is met with anger and reprimand, does organized religion inadvertently create more agnostics than atheists by suppressing intellectual curiosity rather than engaging with it? Matthew, do you want to take that first?
And see how it is. Okay, so maybe it'd be helpful to just highlight a few things about our backgrounds. We're all social workers, but we're very much different. And my background is I am a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I currently serve as a bishop. I'm speaking for myself today, not necessarily speaking in behalf of the church that I belong to or participate in. And I would think that indeed, if inquiry or asking questions was met by anger and reprimand, that it likely would suppress curiosity. Interestingly, my own faith came about in response to a question, and so it was questions from my perspective, and what I've been taught throughout my life, throughout my experience in my own faith, is that a sincere question is an invitation to be taught spiritually. And in my faith tradition, that means to be taught by the Holy Ghost. And so questioning is appropriate. That's the source and the genesis of knowledge, spiritual as well as other forms of knowledge, scientific knowledge. Typically, there's a question that we're trying to answer. And if those questions are met with hostility, it's understandable that it might have an unintended consequences, or it would backfire from a religion or from a faith tradition that suppresses questioning. But I personally believe that religious practice oftentimes is because of our questions and the questions that come up.
Awesome. Xander, do you want to take that question as well?
Sure. Well, like Matt, let me just give you a little synopsis of my experience around religion and faith and spirituality. I was raised in a Mexican Roman Catholic family, and I basically did all the things that I was, supposed to do based on that situation. So I went to Catholic Mass and I had my first communion. I attended what's called catechism or CCD classes when I was in elementary school at a local Catholic school. I would go there after school. It was like studying up on what Catholicism is on the kids' version of things. I did not go through confirmation, so I wasn't confirmed, which is something that happens when you're a little bit older, maybe in your teen years. By that time, my father took me over to more Protestant-based churches. So the Unitarian Universalist Church and also Religious Science Church. My mother was a Unity Church minister, so a little bit of that. Religious Science and Unity have similar origins to each other, although they're two different denominations. But I also was introduced at a really young age through my father mostly about Taoism and Buddhism and Vedanta, which is a Western Hindu tradition, and even the Hare Krishnas. When I was maybe 12, my dad took me to a Hare Krishna restaurant. And so I've been to Hare Krishna temples and restaurants all over the United States for my entire life. I love it. So I'm really all about being, some people have said, called me a seeker. I'm not a seeker, but I'm also not a joiner. So I like to just go and visit a lot of different religious and spiritual and faith communities to just find out, like, what are they into? What are they talking about? Where do these ideas come from? I wanted to go even deeper into that, and I attended seminary. I have a master's in theological studies. So I'm all about learning. I'm all about asking questions. I haven't encountered a system yet where that wasn't encouraged. I haven't been a member of like a religious cult where that might be not appreciated, or some of the more rigid, religious systems. I haven't been part of those, and probably wouldn't be welcome in them anyways. But I wonder if, it depends on the person, right? Some people might move more towards an agnosticism, but I think people can be driven into atheism by virtue of what experiences they have in their religious or spiritual or faith community. I know people who call themselves atheists, but I also know that they were once very, very religious people. Some of them were ministers, but something happened to them in their life and they went on the opposite. They became angry. And it had nothing to do with not being able to ask questions. It mostly had to do with being or feeling rejected because they were either a person or lesbian or bisexual or trans person. And that's part of the world that I come from, so to speak. And so I can understand how people might take that pendulum swing from one all the way to the other. That's a fairly natural response when we have a difficult or upsetting experience. We want to run away from it as far as possible. So I think people are driven to atheism. I think people find agnosticism when they have the opportunity to really think through the things that they've been taught. And not that they're ever going to leave, but they're able to fill in some gaps with other information, perhaps.
Yeah, that makes sense. My experience with religion has been an interesting one. I grew up in a Muslim household, and for some of the viewers, they might have read my article on this, but I'll just quickly summarize. I was in not high school, in elementary school, when I asked my mom, how was the universe created? Because in the Muslim religion, it was always like it took 6 days to create the universe, 6 days to create the universe. And of course, me being interested in science in school, my question to my mom was, 6 days where? Because the Earth, 6 days is one revolution around its own axis is very different from a planet like a year in Venus is shorter than a day in Venus, meaning that Venus flips on its own axis. I think it takes 243 days, Earth days, to turn on its own axis, but 225 days to go around the sun. So a day in Venus is longer than a year in Venus from a scientific perspective. So I use that. I just learned it, not as at my age now, but when I was a kid, I had just learned it, and I want to ask my mom this. My mom said we don't ask these questions. We never ask these questions. It's an indicator of like evil and things like that, and it really turned me off to religion. And that was the first time I questioned being a Muslim. Now, over the course of time, right now, I do identify as an agnostic, but as an agnostic, I still pray every night. which to many doesn't even make sense. How are you agnostic? I like to say that I'm hedging my bets in case there is someone watching who want to get on their good side. You know, that's only about 30% joke though, because as an agnostic, I'm admitting that I don't know. But just because you don't know something doesn't mean that you don't play the odds. And the odds are, in my opinion, that there is way too much beauty in the world for this all to be accidental. And that's just my perspective. Now, that means that I do believe in a higher power, a creator. At the same time, I don't, no offense to anyone. And again, this no offense is meant in any direction. I believe in a higher power, but I don't believe in organized religion. I believe that there is a God or Allah or fill in the blank with the name here. I believe that that entity exists, and I believe that that entity is benevolent. I don't think that they care that I'm praying for new Jordans, but I do think that they care if I say, well, we have so much separation in America and in the world today. Help me figure out a way to unite the world. I think those are requests that are listened to. And I don't know that those requests and those prayers, if you want to call them that, necessarily have to be filtered through an organized religion. And so that's been my experience, and as far as like how I arrived at agnosticism. I still believe in a higher power, but not an organized religion.
I refer to myself as a mystical non-theist
Mhm.
because when I was in seminary, I was reading some articles that the Dalai Lama had written, or maybe it was an interview that somebody did with him. And they asked him, "What is your religion?" And he said, "My religion is compassion." And so they said, "Are you an atheist?" And he said, "No, I'm a non-theist." And they said, "What does that mean?" He said, "I don't deny the existence of God. I don't wonder if there is one or not. I'm just focused on other things, right? It's not an adversarial." And I thought, oh, I like that, but I'm quite mystical, right? I experience a sense of awe and wonder just going about my day, just the cosmology of things. I'm just, it's amazing to me. And just nature, I'm like, why are there 600 kinds of beetles, and why are there so many different kinds of roses, and how many dog types? Like, there's so, like, nature is vast. And again, to me, it doesn't make any sense that it's random, right? There's too much order in it to be random. I don't anthropomorphize though, so it's not a being to me, as far as a higher power. I like to think of it more as like an energy source, because the energy is everywhere, right? When you're standing next to somebody, we can't see it because it's microscopic, but there's energy that flows between, right? There's energy in animate, objects. And so the the energy travels between us, right? And if you look at, what is it like in science, it's, the table looks solid to us, but there's a lot of space in between, the molecules,
Yeah.
right? And so what binds all this matter together that makes us seem solid as human beings and trees is that energy. But I'm not an animist. I don't believe the energy itself is godlike, which would be more, that's more of a type of way of thinking, like worshiping the bush or worshiping the tree. Um, and there's pantheism, which is interesting because it's like the idea that God or whatever is in everything. And I like more the idea that we're inside. So I think that's panentheism, right? Instead of God being in everything, everything is in God. And to me, God would be an energy source. It doesn't have to make sense, because to
Yeah.
me, I'm like, who knows? But that to me is tangible, right?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
one thing is true is that none of us know for sure exactly what it is. We certainly have faith in our perspectives. We've seen things that perhaps nobody else would believe if we tell them we saw it, but we know we saw it, and that's what brings us here. And one of the things I enjoy about having these conversations, especially with Xander and Matthew here, is that it's you leave open the idea of differing perspectives within that conversation, as opposed to pushing any one of our ideas onto others. We acknowledge that this is my worldview. You asked me for it, and that's why I'm telling you. But at the same time, I'm not here to convert anyone to anything. I personally don't even know what I believe. Tomorrow will be something new, and so allowing myself to be that open is really wonderful here.
I think a question, though, and the question that we're obviously discussing today is, what is agnosticism, or, as we try to define it or wrestle with it, or to what degree are we all agnostic? Because, there are things that we may not know. And, as I mentioned earlier, I think, questions are invitations to connect, whether they are social questions where we're just trying to get to know each other, figure out, find our way together, figure out how do we coexist and work together in a pluralistic society. Those are critical questions to be asking in our current time. But some questions do invite a little bit of divine inspiration, divine guidance. And some of those are matters of things that are spiritual. Some of those things are in matters that are temporal. And whether that's an energy or whether that's something else, in what was the genesis of my own faith tradition was questioned by a young boy who, he was trying to figure out where to find truth. And where to find truth in a faith tradition. And he was concerned about the welfare of his soul, and so reading the Bible and trying to figure out where to how am I going to figure this out? He finds a question that invites. He finds a scripture that invites a question, and it's in James 1:5 where it says, "If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask. Let him ask of God." It's a spiritual imperative that we ask, that we maintain an open stance. That we don't arrive at a conclusion that we've got it all figured out, but that we be open and we ask with a sincere heart, believing that we will receive, and if we ask in that way, we'll be given. Maybe not exactly the way we want it, but we will be given something.
Yeah. Now, what does it mean to be God-fearing in that context, to be welcoming of different ideas, differing perspectives, and asking these questions? And at the same time, the term God-fearing has been used so often. And so another question here is that how do we reconcile God-fearing with a loving and compassionate creator?
Well,
Yeah.
I'd be happy to respond or kind of share some thoughts. One of the tenets of my faith and article of faith is that we believe the Bible to be the Word of God as far as it is translated correctly, and so translation and interpretation is very much important. And so, what does it mean to be God-fearing? Do we need to be intimidated or fear God, or worry that he's going to zap us, or that he's going to do something to harm us? I think what that means, if the way that I've interpreted that, is to be God respecting, to acknowledge that there's something there, and not to fear him in the way that I might fear another human being or someone, but that I might recognize that he's there, recognize that he has great influence, great power, great knowledge. But it's not necessarily a source of fear for me as much as it is a source of confidence in who he is. And as I come to get to know him, then the better I know him, the less I fear him, because I understand how he operates and how he functions. And so that's what I would think, differentiating and making sure we're interpreting that accurately.
Yeah.
That it's not necessarily something to be fearful in the traditional sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think especially when we're teaching religion, any religion for the first time, I think it's important to convey that the teachings are not punitive or meant to be punitive in nature, rather a guide. Like this is a good thing to do, this is a bad thing to do, and it's not like, well, if you don't believe this, then you're automatically going to go to hell or something like that, or downstairs.
Right.
And just keeping that in mind. I think that's an important distinction to make too. And sometimes it gets lost in the mix. I'll share a little personal anecdote here too. Is that there was a conversation that I had a while back with someone who's religious. Who I was on the phone with them. I had to get going real quick, and they on the phone they asked me, well, are you praying 5 times a day? That's what we do in Islam. We pray 5 times a day. My response was no, I'm not. I'm not praying 5 times a day. And so the person on the end of the line was like, "Well, you should." And I'm like, "Well, I'm actually getting off the phone with you right now because I'm working with Special Olympics, with working with kids in the Special Olympics to help them, socialize and enjoy life. So wouldn't God, or in this case, wouldn't Allah, want me to do what's best for this community? How would Allah want me to spend the next 30 minutes praying and to Him, or going and helping these kids? And I was so surprised that there was no pause. It's like, no, Allah would want you to pray. And I was like, I don't know that that's exactly true. And I think it goes without saying that this person does not represent Islam, is not a spokesperson for Islam, rather a spokesperson of what they interpret to be Islam. And so by no way is that a referendum of the Muslim religion or Islam, or any religion, period. However, there certainly are people who interpret religion in such a way and call themselves experts and make it seem as though their interpretation is the interpretation of that religion, which then could seem punitive to some.
Interesting. Yeah. So if they were, when you speak in behalf of Allah, or if you speak in behalf of God, that this is what you should be doing, what you ought to be doing, it might not always fit in our circumstances, and the two great commandments that Christ taught were that, it is important that we love God, but it's also important that we love our neighbor, that we love our fellow men. And how do I do that? Well, that's an ongoing conversation, because I'm always, focusing, not always, but I spend much of my life going from one thing to another. But sometimes I've found that the most important things I do involve departing from my plan and doing what I feel impressed to do or feel inspired to do, to have a conversation, to serve someone, or to do what I can to make a difference.
Yeah.
And prayer is just one of those things, but in many ways, one's life is an ongoing conversation with God.
Yeah, we have someone in the chat who says, in the Christian tradition, prayer is a constant conversation. There are definitely times where prayer is good, but it is not something that is dictated, which wouldn't really be relational. Sorry. Xander, do you want to chime in on the thought of how do you reconcile God-fearing with a loving and compassionate creator?
Yeah, sorry for that. I get kicked out of StreamYard all the time. I'm not sure what my problem is with my computer.
Welcome.
I think of God-fearing as a call to behave in such a way that if there is such a thing as the pearly gates, when I get there, I'm good. Right? I take it as a commandment to act properly, to behave, to be compassionate, to be loving, to be kind, to be generous, to do good works. So that's, I don't associate it with wrath of God or that. I wasn't ever taught that. So I don't know really where that comes from. I think one of the troubles that we can get into is when we say Muslims this, Christians this, Hindus this. There are so many different Christian denominations. We can't say Christians do this. That's not correct. Like we couldn't say Muslims do this. We couldn't say Catholics do this. Hindus, Baha'is, right? Buddhists. There's so many different branches, and there's too much in all of these things. And so I think that's one of the ways in which we can know that the possibility exists that whatever denomination or branch or religion that we're part of, that it might not have all the answers. Right? That doesn't mean we leave it. That doesn't mean we reject it. That just means that maybe we can add in, right? So maybe you're a Catholic, but you read books on Stoicism to get that, right? So we can do those things to complement and supplement our spiritual experiences or teachings or religious community. It doesn't have to be the end all be all. And I think that might be where people run into trouble, is expecting it to be the answer for everything.
Yeah.
It's where we find the person we're going to marry. It's the place that we do all of our social activities. It's the place that we invest all our time. It's the place where we know to go and get the answer to the question. That's a lot of pressure to put on a church or a synagogue or a, temple, or,
So you're arguing on behalf of sort of contextualizing spirituality in that sense, as in, like, it doesn't need to be everything.
Sure.
But it could be something.
Yeah, I mean, contextualizing religion and spirituality is seminary 101. That's what we learn to do. So it's, it's the same thing with a relationship. When we expect our spouse to be our confidant, our best friend, our exercise buddy, right, that's too much pressure on one person. I think we do that. I think that's what we do to clergy very often, right? Religious leaders, the pressure we put on them to be everything all the time. Matt could probably speak to that. It's a big job with a lot of responsibilities. And some people want their minister to be like a doctor. Some want them to be like a teacher. Some of them want them to be like a parent. Some people want all those things, and they want them to be brilliant and infallible. And it's like, oh boy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Always available 24/7.
Yeah. I think, God-fearing in a way that there's reverence, that we approach, God with reverence, but really that our life is spent in trying to become something like God. One expression of our temporal faith is the principle of self-reliance in my faith tradition. And I think might seem like a little bit of an oxymoron, because fear, ultimately, if you are doing something out of fear, it's not sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as that source of fear goes away, you are no longer acting on your own accord. You're no longer acting in a manner that is your own, that reflects your own character. That is the absence of self-reliance. And so God-fearing creates dependence, but it also, if we try and act independently of God, I don't think that's necessarily what I'm suggesting is self-reliance, but kind of this interdependence. Mm-hmm. And when there's interdependence, I can approach God, I can talk to God, I can have an ongoing relationship with God, I can try to become what I believe He is like, and that is what I think is ultimately what we want, what I'm trying to do and to experience, and trying to help other people do the same. That's the role of clergy, is to help other people do that, rather than being dependent upon me as clergy or their own clergy, that they develop this personal relationship.
That makes sense. One of the questions here as well is that, so for a person who is content with their spiritual life, what value does organized religion add?
If they're content with their spiritual life?
Yeah.
outside of an organized religion.
Yep, outside of an organized religion. What then would an organized religion add?
Well, there are a couple of things that come to mind. One is connection with people who have similar beliefs and similar interests in trying to become and to belong. And so those elements of belonging and becoming, something that is beyond who you currently see yourself as, or what you believe you can do in your current state. So those things I think are extremely important. There's plenty of, I don't believe that we should necessarily practice our faith that it should be dependent upon empiricism, but because a lot of the things of the divine, the spiritual things are not things that can be empirically proven or supported. However, there is a fairly significant body of research that substantiates the value of religion in facilitating that connection and that sense of meaning and purpose in one's life. And I was just reading an article recently. It's a couple years old now, but it talked about the not so good faith estimate of the value of religion, and how that, a good faith estimate is one thing, but there's a lot of underestimating that sometimes happens from when we apply empirical approaches to seeing the value of religion in one's life. That said, if you are content with your life, I don't think that religion or faith should be imposed or should be coerced. Agency, it should be something that you are invited to seek and to find for yourself, and to recognize that you might be able to find something serendipitous that you didn't even know was there, or learn things that you didn't even know were there. And those are some things that I think a faith tradition or organized religion might be able to do for you.
Sandra?
Yeah. Matt was talking about, the empirical evidence. I was reading an article recently. There's been an ongoing study for well over 100 years now, that's tracking. It was tracking individuals, and then it started tracking all their family members. And it's this huge study on happiness to find out, when you get older, what is it that is bringing you the most joy, the most happiness, and who are the healthiest people, right? Mentally, physically, spiritually. And what they have found is that faith is one of the three major components to living a long, healthy life, right? And so what some of the reasons for that are because you're in community, right? You have that connection, because isolation and loneliness is the World Health Organization. We now know that being lonely has a negative impact on our health, that's similar to smoking cigarettes. Like, it really does, bring us down in our well-being. And so faith just provides a place for people to go on a regular basis. Now, of course, that could also be things like, maybe somebody's going to attend a humanist society meeting, or they're going to go to a local free thinkers meetup that meets up at a coffee house, right? Something, right? Because faith doesn't have to be religion or spirituality, right? We can have faith in people, it's that connecting in and just wanting to be part of something that's not just us, right? And then that helps in other ways too. So I think, if people are perfectly happy with wherever they've landed on, spiritually or religiously, with their faith, and they don't want to belong. I'm not much of a belonger, so I get not wanting to join and be a member of something, because I don't do that either, but I'm still engaged. I just move around a lot, so I don't put any anchors down. But my wife and I were just having a conversation recently. Margaret and I met in seminary, so we have some, overlapping interests here. We're going to be moving within the next year. And I said, when we get wherever we're going, I think we should find a church, and we should just be there for as long as we're living wherever we're living, and let's just do that. And she's like, okay, because we've been jumping around for 20 something years now, just going to Quaker meetings and this and that and the other thing. And I'm like, let's try it. Let's try just being part of an actual community and see what that's like, because neither one of us have really had that.
Yeah. The chat is also saying similar things, that the community, others to talk to about faith and accountability are things that you get from organized religion, even if you are spiritually content.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
let,
and a lot of people say you don't need religion in order to be law abiding or moral. And it's like, but I'm sure they know that our laws and the morals are based on religious teachings.
yeah,
I mean, that's just where these things come from. Why is murder wrong? Thou shalt not kill, right? I mean,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, although that is written, and that's what I was taught growing up Muslim as well. And one of the questions that my parents would ask me when I really started to push back on being religious was that, well, how would you know not to kill anyone if you don't believe in Allah or
Yeah.
religion or God? How would you know not to kill anyone? And my response, which got me beat with a hanger plenty of times, which is fine. That's cultural. That's fine. That's fine. Plus, they're not big enough to really do much damage. But anyway, my response was like, well, if I need someone else to tell me that I shouldn't kill someone, I'm already a bad person. And there's some truth to both sides, and that there's guidance here. Sometimes it is very difficult to know what is the right thing to do,
Mhm.
and religion can certainly be a guideline related to that. Murder might be the simplest example of, like, we know that it's wrong to kill other people.
Yeah.
But then again, how much do we know that? In the interest of viewpoint diversity,
Mm.
have any of us? I haven't, but maybe either of you have. Have you talked to a cannibal? I've watched videos, and cannibals justify their perspectives, and so to them, murdering and eating other humans is moral. So maybe there is something to say that in that morality isn't as objective as we sometimes see it as, and that might create an even greater need for organized religion as guidance.
Mm.
Maybe, but maybe it's this God fearing, right? We were talking about this fear of God, the wrath of God, what God might do if we break the rules, the commandments, the pronouncements. Maybe that's one of the reasons why people leave religion and become not agnostic again, but more atheist, because they get rebellious. It's like they don't want daddy telling them what to do, right? There might be that argument that people have internally, because maybe they want to act on their hedonistic desires. They want to, right? And so they don't want to deal with people judging them, or they might even have their own internalized sense of wrongness and guilt and shame, and they don't like that, and they can either work through it or they can just throw off the whole system, right? And then it's like, well, I'm not governed by that anymore, so there's nothing to be guilty about.
Mm.
I can do all these things that I want to do that are maybe harmful to me and my body and the people I'm engaging with, you know.
But if you're only kind of staying in your path because somebody's going to punish you, again, you're kind of fear based.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But what if faith is about seeing something that you can become, rather than something that you're being coerced into doing, or where you choose to behave in a certain way, in a pro-social way, in a way that helps other people or contributes to society. And
Mhm.
I have just my own experience. It's probably just my own interactions with people in my faith who come to me for spiritual guidance. More often, I rarely have to call somebody out and tell them, you got to change. More often than not, they're coming to me and saying, hey, I just want to be a little bit better. I want to do better. And I'm not, here's some things that I'm doing that I don't feel entirely comfortable about. And what an organized religion can do is, if you have somebody who's a supportive advocate with you, you've got that. You have somebody to minister to you, who's on your side, who's trying to help you become the person you want to become. And it's not just clergy. You know, you have your fellow parishioners or church members, people who are surrounding you, who are also encouraging you. And of course, you know, religion oftentimes gets the bad rap of being judgmental. But my own experience is that I see encouragement much more often than I see judgment.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. One of the other questions that we have is, can you respond to the criticism that much of religious practice feels transactional and similar to like a pyramid scheme?
Yeah.
You know what I found is I've heard from people over the years they've left their religion that they were raised in, and they've gone to some other system, religious system that's from a completely different part of the world than where they grew up, right? That's not uncommon. And why did they do that? They would say, oh, I wanted something more spiritual than religious. I wanted to engage in certain practices that weren't available in my system. And one of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of that comes from a very either surface or superficial or young exposure to their faith tradition that their family is part of. And so they think, oh, I need to become a Buddhist so I can meditate. And they don't know that centering prayer is a central component to a lot of Christianity, right? And walking the labyrinth, which is similar to like a mindfulness exercise, or right. So I think that people don't know that there's mysticism in Christianity and Judaism and Islam, right? And because they don't know about the mystical components of these faith traditions, they think they have to go to another tradition to tap into mysticism. And all they need to do is just go and look for the mysticism in their own denomination, or leave it. But if people are leaving it because they think it doesn't exist, that's just not the truth. That's just not fact, right? They can go to an Orthodox Christian church and get all the mysticism they want. So, and I don't mean by Orthodox, I don't mean fundamentalist like evangelical Christian. I mean like Coptic Christian, Greek Orthodox, right? Syrian Orthodox. They're very mystical in their practices. And so if people want more of that, they don't need to go become a Buddhist. They can chant and they can do centering prayer and mindfulness as a Christian or a Jew, right?
So
Matt, do you want to?
yeah, is the pyramid scheme kind of the idea that recruitment is your primary focus and you're having to build? Yeah. I think if you're seeking your own interest, seeking your own glory, seeking your own motives, you know, your own profit, if you will, that is much different than what I've experienced. And I have been a proselyting missionary. I work, you know, for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, working with missionaries, and there is nothing in that missionary experience that was about seeking my own interest or my own glory. Inviting others to come and see, to learn from themselves, is not intended to be coercive nor to be self-meritorious or anything like that. It is a sincere reflection of belief, of confidence, and a desire to share and to be pro-social, to help others with something that one has found helpful, much like we're doing today on this podcast. We're just sharing, perhaps modeling some interaction styles, some dialogue, recognizing that there are differences, demonstrating respect for those differences, not because I'm trying to recruit, but because we're seeking truth, because we're seeking connection, because we're seeking to try and improve the world and emphasize liberal values of pluralism and freedom. But if the interest is in sharing good, that's completely different than saying, okay, my interest is in seeking my own good, my own will, my own fame, my own fortune, those kinds of things. As soon as you get into that, your religion can then become corrupted, rather than saying, hey, this is something that I truly believe in, has made a difference in my life, and I hope that it will make a difference in yours.
Yeah, makes
I
sense.
think, there are so many different religious systems and faith and spiritual traditions that people can pick and choose. Some are going to be much more like rigid, or, you must believe this, and this. But oftentimes people will say, oh, I can't be a Christian because I don't believe in blah, blah, blah. And I'll say, well, not all Christians believe that. And they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, there's so many different beliefs, and so it's not a one and done kind of thing. And so again, I think oftentimes people are influenced by the church that they grew up in. And they think, yeah, I used to have conversations with people, and they would say, oh, I don't like going to church anymore. And I would say, well, what church did you grow up in? Christian? And I'd say, Catholic or Protestant? And they'd say, what? And I'd say, Catholic or Protestant? And they don't know. See, they don't know that they were at a Lutheran church or a Baptist, and they don't know if it was American or Southern Baptist, right? So when you don't know what it actually your parents or your other family members are taking you to, and you make a decision based on that, that's very limited, right, information. And so I think that's why it's common for young adults to move away from the church. And then they start families and they come back to the church because they remember, oh yeah, that was a good place for that. Because people are going out and they're investigating and they're experiencing, and they're trying to figure out, where do I fit in? What's going to be the best system for me? But yeah, you have to actually do that, right? And so go out there and go to different worship services and different ceremonies. And yeah, I love it. I think it's very interesting, which is probably why I don't belong to one particular church, because so many of them offer so many things that I find interesting, and I haven't yet found one that offers all the things that I like.
Yeah.
It probably doesn't exist.
Church of Xander.
That's
Yeah.
right.
We have a question or a comment and a question from the chat. So many people believe that if you talk about your faith, that you are trying to recruit automatically, which too often cuts at meaningful relationships. But it is very common for people to push atheism, and it doesn't receive the same kind of blowback. Why is that?
Oh.
Yes.
Okay. So, we've been working on this project to promote viewpoint and political diversity. And when I first started talking about this, I connected with Dr. David Hodge. He is faculty at Arizona State University. At least that's where he was at the time. I was living in Arizona. And he's authored quite a bit on secular privilege and how we live in a society that privileges secularism. And for somebody who believes in a particular faith tradition, that is quite obvious. So faith, because of how the courts have ruled on the First Amendment, specifically the Congress shall make no law prohibit, prescribing the establishment of religion. That's the first part. That's the first phrase. But the next phrase gets ignored more often than not, which states, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. The free exercise clause doesn't get as much traction. I think part of that is because when you do, there have been efforts to institutionalize faith. There have been efforts that have resulted, speaking from my own family history, where religious, people of a certain faith, of my faith, were driven out of communities, out of states. There was an extermination order in the state of Missouri until the 70s, for people of my faith. And of course, it wasn't being practiced back then, but they did rescind it in the 70s. but I think those are the kinds of things that the history of imposition has created a little bit of the pendulum swinging one way, but then the Supreme Court rulings over the last in the 20th century in particular were very much secularizing and moving away from faith traditions.
Yeah, that makes sense. Xander, do you want to, same question. Why doesn't atheism being promoted get as much blowback as theism being promoted?
Such a good question, and I don't have an answer. Let me think about it for a second.
Sure. So as you're thinking,
Yeah.
one of the things that came to mind as I was reading this question is that I wonder if atheism being a lack of an intentional lack of belief means that you're sort of being poisoned through the air, and you don't necessarily know what you're looking at. It's invisible. Whereas with a religion, whether it's Islam, whether it's Christianity, whether it's Judaism, whether it's whatever it is, you know what it is that you're talking about. But with atheism, you're intentionally talking about that thing not existing. And so it's a little overly scientific for a conversation like this, but it's like talking about antimatter. Matter is very simple. Like, we're all made up of it. Everything, my desk is made up of it. When we talk about antimatter, no one's seen it. No one could actually see it. We don't have the ability to see it or perceive it or feel it or smell it or hear it or anything like that. And so, how do we write articles about antimatter, or how do other people write articles about antimatter? It's very difficult. And I wonder if atheism benefits from that level of just, you don't know who we are, what we're doing. So it's more difficult to criticize. What do you think?
So what I came up with is, I think it all depends on the context. So I think a devoutly religious person who is quite strident in their beliefs and is critical of people who don't share their beliefs is going to have a really difficult time having conversations with people who might take a completely different approach. I think that if somebody who's a very strident atheist who has just as strong of beliefs that their system of thought is the only correct one, they're going to run into the same problems if they're in a setting with religious people. So I just think that it's the extremes, right? I think it depends on the context of, I think that Christianity and Christians in particular are for some reason, outside of other religious communities, tend to be very easily ridiculed in our society and put into this completely separate category of acceptability. The Christians have done this and the Christians have done that, and Christianity is this and Christianity is that. And it's like, well, if we're going to have a conversation about the destructive elements of religious communities and teachings, we might as well put them all on the table, because what the Japanese Buddhists did to the Koreans pre-war is pretty heinous. The people are like, well, what about the Inquisition? It's like, well, what about what came before the Inquisition? What were the Christians responding to, right? So it's one of those things where I don't think people understand the full history, and then they're segregating themselves off maybe into other friend groups or social media groups, and certain things are going to be more popular than others. I mean, as social workers, Matt and I know this, that we've encountered people who have said things like, if you're a Christian, then you can't be an ethical social worker. And I was like, well, can a Buddhist or a Jewish social worker or a Hindu or a Muslim social worker, are they all good with the ethics, just not the Christian social workers? Because people pile on. But that's the United States. Maybe in some other country, they're piling on some other religion, right? I think it's contextual. I mean, I have a lot of atheist friends, and they could talk around me without me. I haven't seen anybody, really push back on that. But I have friends, of course, who are very religious, and my atheist friends don't even push back on them.
Mm.
So I think it's the kind of person you are. Are you a kind and generous atheist, or theist in general? Or are you not? Are you an a-hole theist and an a-hole not atheist? Right? I think these things are interchangeable.
A dear friend of mine talks about how, life ending, and this person doesn't necessarily believe in an afterlife. There's a certain calmness to that, knowing that there is an end to this, whether it's a suffering, whether it's a joyous life. To know that there is an end means that this will be over. So whether it's, if you're going through a lot of suffering, that'll come to an end. But it also pushes us to be as productive as possible, understanding that this is finite. If there are people who, don't believe in an afterlife or don't believe in reincarnation, believe that this is the end and there's nothing after this, our lives as they are today, then it creates a sense of urgency, certainly, to get everything you can possibly get done. And this is a great person.
Or nihilism.
Yeah, exactly. So, right. So, what is the point of doing anything then? Right. So there's so many different ways you can look at the same thing. It's like a picture of a 6 and a 9, right? So if we're standing across from each other and I draw a 6 on my side, it'll look like a 9 to you. And we might be looking at the same thing, but our perspectives might be so different.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the interest of viewpoint and viewpoint diversity, and with time starting to run out, I'm curious to hear from you both, just playing devil's advocate, or maybe not devils in this context, playing
Agnostics advocate.
a counter argument. Right, exactly. What would you say? Imagine that there is an atheist or agnostic person watching us right now, and you play that part as well. What's in it for them? It meaning life. What is their meaning of life? If you were an atheist, or if you were an agnostic, and not my kind of agnostic that still prays, it's just like more of like a questioning type. If you were an actual atheist, how would you answer that question? What is the meaning of life?
From my own perspective,
Mhm.
I would ask, what's the desire of your heart? That invites the exercise of agency. And more often than not, the desire of the heart is the long term, not the immediate appetites and those kinds of things, but the long term desire of the heart is oftentimes something of significance and significant meaning. And oftentimes, those are the things that emerge that are oftentimes very godlike. And to be true to those things that you know to be true, in the truth in many ways is the meaning of life. To become the best version of yourself is the meaning of life. And you need organized religion for that. Some would argue not, but my response would be that it stacks the deck in your odds when you learn principles and patterns that help refine you and help you become. And in my faith tradition, that's the doctrine of Christ that helps you orient towards Him, who is good, who is true, who is the source of life. And then you do your best, and you make a lot of mistakes, and you mess up. But through Him and through His sacrifice for us, we don't necessarily have to be defined by those things, but we keep, circling up the mountain to become. And so that is what I would say is to a friend who was struggling to believe, I would invite them to exercise their own agency to what they would like to become, and then strive on their journey to become them.
Awesome. Thank you. Xander, do you want to take that as well?
Yeah. I like the idea of inviting people to reflect on what is it that gives them meaning and purpose in life, and to do a lot more of that. Right? It doesn't necessarily have to have anything to do with religion or spirituality or faith. Another exercise could be a think of yourself as a much older person looking back. What do you want your legacy to be? What do you want to be remembered for? What do you want to leave behind? Right? So we can also focus on that, and I think in the end that's good enough, right? Because we're focused on what we value, what matters most, what brings us meaning. And typically that's going to be family and nature and community and all these wonderful things. And also know that, you can find a gathering space, a place where people are gathering that might look like a church, but they don't talk about God. Um, right? You can go to a Quaker meeting and just sit in silence for 60 minutes. I love that. And people don't really talk about God. Or you can go to a Unitarian Universalist church where the congregation is predominantly more humanistic and agnostic, and they'll talk about social justice issues from the pulpit, right? So people can do different things. Or you can go off to, Vipassana meditation groups. Right, but that is about self-care, right? It's putting yourself in an environment where you're learning how to self-regulate your emotions, and the stress, because stress is going to come. I think people find faith communities really helpful when they're under stress and they need support, because people will approach them, they'll offer them support, they'll cook meals for them, they'll come visit them at their home, right? These are things that might matter a lot to us as we get older too. So, just do it. Do what brings you the most joy, but not at the expense of other people, not in a hedonistic way.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for a wonderful conversation, Matthew and Xander.
Hey, we hear yours, and we hope the lightning doesn't strike. While you're I heard Xander lightning is striking outside, right?
Yeah, thunder and lightning storm. It's bad.
That's right. Nafis, tell us how you would respond.
Well, my response to anyone is, be the best version of you, not the second best version of what others expect you to be.
Mm.
And if that means that you lean into, any religion very, very, radically, if that's the language you want to use, fine. If you want to lean into atheism radically, that's fine. If that's what the best version of you looks like, that's perfectly fine. I often have to answer the question of, Nafis, how can you call yourself agnostic but you pray every night? And my response is like, well, there's levels to this.
Right.
For me, it's a gray area. And so being an agnostic doesn't mean that I'm an atheist who says there's no such thing as religion. An
Right.
agnostic means I don't know, but my guess is this, and my guess is that. So right now, my guess is that there is a creator. And my guess is also that there is no organized religion. Again, not trying to be offensive to anyone, but that's just my guess. Right. And my guess is, and I like calling them guesses because they can change at any moment. Like tomorrow, it might be something completely different. And so when I speak to my creator, and I don't use the word Allah, I don't use the word God either. I talk like it's a friend upstairs with a whole lot more power than I will ever have. But the way that I speak is that I'm not asking for Jordans. That's my responsibility. And hopefully I can't afford Jordans, although they're getting real expensive these days, right? But like, I ask for an ability to make the world a better place, for the three of us to make social work a better curriculum, more inclusive curriculum, which will have a domino effect on society, creating viewpoint and political diversity in society, not just in social work reaccreditation, but social work education, social work practice, and society in general. So, and there have been some things that I've been pointed to that suggest, okay, so this might be religion, this might be a creator. I know that this is something, or in my opinion, I feel like this is something beyond just the normal. It seems almost, supernatural. But again, it's a guess as to what precisely it is. You know, and I'm sure we've all seen things that were like, I didn't see that. Did I really see that? I didn't see that. No one would believe me if I told them. And I won't say it here.
Mhm. Yeah.
You know, and we've seen those things,
Yeah.
but it's still a guess as to what that exactly is. And so to my atheist friends, to my agnostic friends, and to all of my friends and our friends across all religious spectrums, including non-religious spectrums, really encourage people just figure out what the best version of you is and go be that. Don't try to be the second best version of what others are trying to be. Be the best version of you.
It's great.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Xander, for a wonderful conversation. Thank you to our watchers, or viewers and listeners and commenters who have been so engaging during our live stream here. And we look forward to having more conversations like this in the future. This has been Defining Agnosticism. Thank you again. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.